Have you ever provided the absolute foundation for someone else's life, only to realize they view your generosity not as a gift, but as an endless, unconditional entitlement? If you have ever been the quiet, competent woman who funded the illusion of someone else's success, only to be discarded the moment you were no longer deemed useful to their social climbing, this story is for you. Let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. And remember, all names and identifying details have been changed to protect the privacy of the individuals involved and to satisfy my incredibly ruthless legal team. My name is Alexandra Vance. I am 35 years old, and I am a corporate restructuring executive. For those unacquainted with the high-stakes world of corporate finance, my job description is relatively straightforward. I dismantle failing empires. When a multi-million-dollar corporation overleverages its assets and begins bleeding capital, the board of directors calls my firm. I walk into hostile environments, freeze operations, liquidate non-performing assets, and extract whatever value remains for the secured creditors. I am accustomed to dealing with desperate, arrogant executives who believe the rules do not apply to them. I spend my days firing CEOs who have bought luxury yachts on company credit, and I sell off their corner offices to pay the severance packages of the employees they ruined. I operate in a world defined by absolute, unforgiving mathematics. I did not, however, expect to find it necessary to apply those same ruthless mathematics to my own older brother. 3 years ago, my brother David, a man 45 years old and perennially failing upward, called me in tears. David is charming, handsome, and entirely allergic to sustained effort. He is the kind of man who possesses a very specific unearned confidence, believing that his mere existence should guarantee him a life of absolute luxury. He had just married Chloe, a woman a decade younger than him, who possessed the ambition of a Fortune 500 CEO but the work ethic of a pampered house cat. They had found their dream home. It was a sprawling $3.5 million ultra-modern compound nestled in the hills of Austin, Texas. It featured floor-to-ceiling glass walls, an infinity pool overlooking the canyon, and a completely integrated smart home system. It was the kind of property designed specifically to host lavish, catered parties and to serve as a backdrop for highly curated social media feeds. There was only one problem: David and Chloe were practically bankrupt. David's latest tech startup and app, designed to deliver artisanal ice to upscale bars, had inevitably collapsed, and Chloe's career as a luxury lifestyle consultant generated precisely zero income. They were $700 and $1,000 short on the down payment, and they did not possess the credit required to secure a mortgage of that magnitude. David begged. He invoked the memory of our late parents. He promised that this house was the anchor he needed to finally stabilize his life. He swore that he would rebuild his career and pay me back every single cent. I am not a naive woman, but I am fiercely protective of the very small family I have left. I had just closed a massive restructuring deal, involving an international shipping conglomerate, and my annual bonus alone could have covered the down payment twice over. I wanted to see my brother succeed. I wanted to see him settled. I did not just write a check. In my profession, you do not simply hand a sinking ship an anchor and hope it floats. You structure the risk. I engaged my personal legal counsel, a brilliant, terrifying former federal prosecutor named Harrison. Together we established a corporate entity, Vanguard Holding Partners LLC. The LLC purchased the Austin compound outright. The operating agreement was meticulously drafted and bulletproof. Vanguard Holding Partners held the physical title to the property. As the sole financier, I retained a 51% majority controlling interest as the managing member. David and Chloe shared the remaining 49%. Furthermore, because I knew David's financial reality, I agreed to quietly cover the massive monthly mortgage drafts, the property taxes, and the exorbitant corporate umbrella insurance required for a property of that size. I essentially subsidized their entire lifestyle under the strict legal framework of the LLC. We closed on a Tuesday in early October. Harrison sat at the head of the polished conference table and read the key clauses of the operating agreement aloud before allowing anyone to touch a pen. He is a man who insists on absolute clarity, the managing member, Harrison stated, his deep voice carrying the weight of a judge reading a sentence. Retains sole, unilateral authority over the marketing, listing, liquidation, or sale of the LLC's physical property. This authority is absolute and may be executed without the prior consent of the minority members. David barely listened. He was already scrolling through luxury furniture catalogs on his iPad. Chloe smiled vacantly, her eyes fixed on the massive diamond ring David had clearly purchased on credit. They signed the documents without asking a single question. For the first 2 years, the arrangement functioned relatively well. David secured a mid-level management position at a logistics firm, and Chloe began hosting lavish cocktail parties by the infinity pool. I visited occasionally, usually for major holidays. I was always placed in the most luxurious guest suite. I was served the finest champagne. I was introduced to their affluent new neighbors, a collection of venture capitalists, plastic surgeons and tech entrepreneurs as David's brilliant sister. But the subtle, insidious shift began shortly after Chloe's mother, Beatrice, moved into the guest house. Beatrice was a master of the covert, passive-aggressive strike. She never openly insulted me. She simply employed a relentless campaign of psychological attrition, designed to minimize presence and elevate her own. At Thanksgiving dinner, while I sat at the table eating a meal I had technically paid for, Beatrice smiled sweetly and remarked, "Alexandra, you are always so busy with your little corporate liquidations. It's a shame you don't have time to build a real family. But don't worry, David and Chloe are creating a beautiful legacy here. We are so blessed to have this estate in our family." Our family, I noted the pronoun shift. I did not engage. I simply sipped my wine and mentally calculated the exact dollar amount of the mortgage draft that was scheduled to exit my account the following morning. By the 3rd year, my presence in the Austin compound had shifted from honored guest to tolerated benefactor. I was no longer invited to the impromptu cocktail parties. When I did visit, the conversations would inexplicably halt when I entered the room. Chloe's Instagram feed, a heavily curated monument to effortless wealth and chosen joy, rarely featured me. When I was included in a group photo, I was inevitably cropped out or relegated to the far edge of the frame, my presence minimized to maintain the illusion that David and Chloe were the sole architects of their luxury. I mention this to no one. In the corporate restructuring world, you learn to observe the shifting dynamics of a boardroom without betraying a single emotion. You log the slights, you document the exclusion, and you wait for the inevitable overreach. That overreach arrived on a seemingly innocuous Thursday evening in early May. I was sitting in my penthouse in Chicago, reviewing a massive data cache related to an impending hostile takeover, when my phone buzzed. The file on my screens was a sprawling, convoluted mess of toxic commercial real estate loans bundled together by a failing investment bank in Chicago. The bank's executives had spent 5 years hiding their catastrophic losses through a labyrinth of shell companies and offshore accounts. It was my job to untangle the knots, isolate the bad debt, and prepare the core, profitable divisions of the bank for immediate liquidation to a rival firm. I had spent 14 hours that day aggressively deposing the bank's chief financial officer, methodically destroying his carefully constructed alibis with hard, undeniable mathematical proof. My mind was operating in a state of hypervigilance, actively seeking out discrepancies and identifying patterns of deception. I was primed to detect fraud at a macro level, involving hundreds of millions of dollars. So when David's text message arrived, it was a text message from David. It was not a request, it was a notification. "Hey Lex, wanted to let you know you're not coming to the Monaco charter with us next month. Chloe's mom really wants this to be a family-only trip. Nothing personal, hope you understand." I stopped reading the data cache. I stared at the screen of my phone. I did not cry. Crying is a biological response to grief, and I was not grieving. I was calculating, nothing personal. He had deployed 3 words to dismiss a lifetime of support, utilizing the digital equivalent of a post-it note to exclude me from a major life event. He had cited his mother-in-law's preference as the deciding factor, elevating a woman who contributed absolutely nothing to the equation over the sister who quite literally provided the roof over his head. Family only, I turned the phrase over in my mind, examining it with the cold, detached precision of an auditor, finding a massive discrepancy in a ledger. I had funded the $700,000 down payment. I had covered the exorbitant mortgage every single month for 3 years. I paid the corporate insurance that allowed them to host their lavish parties by the infinity pool. Apparently, none of that capital had secured my position within the family. It had merely secured my utility. I did not reply to the text. I set the phone face down on the glass desk. When you have spent a decade dealing with arrogant, entitled executives, you learn a fundamental truth about human nature. People who believe they are untouchable will always inevitably provide you with the exact rope required to hang them. I opened my encrypted laptop. I did not log into my corporate server. I logged into a secondary, highly secure network that I utilized for deep dive background investigations during hostile takeovers. If David and Chloe were casually booking a luxury yacht charter in Monaco, an excursion that typically starts at $80,000 a week, they were either drastically altering their financial reality, or they were hiding something massive. I spent the next 3 hours tracing their digital footprint. Chloe's Instagram was locked down to a close friends list that I was obviously not on, but Beatrice's Facebook page was entirely public. Beatrice was not a woman who understood digital discretion. She viewed social media as a weaponized broadcast system. It took me less than 10 minutes to find the post. It was dated January 14th, nearly 4 months prior to David's text message. It was a photograph of a glossy brochure for a 120-foot luxury motor yacht named the Azure Sovereign, currently docked in Port Hercules, Monaco. The caption read, "Counting down the days. 150 days until the ultimate family getaway on the Riviera. So blessed that David and Chloe are treating me to this once-in-a-lifetime experience." Monaco E26 is family first. I sat back in my leather chair. The ambient hum of the city traffic below my penthouse faded into absolute silence. They had booked the charter in January, they had planned it, finalized the itinerary, and celebrated it for 4 entire months, while actively looking me in the eye during my occasional visits and telling me they had no summer plans. They had not simply forgotten to invite me, they had actively, strategically structured a massive lie, navigating around my presence with the deliberate intent of exclusion. And they had done it while quietly allowing me to continue subsidizing the very lifestyle that made their illusion possible. I picked up my phone and dialed Harrison's private number. It was 11:45 p.m. Harrison on the first ring, his voice crisp and completely devoid of sleep. "Alexandra," Harrison said, "whose empire are we dismantling at this hour?" "My brother's," I replied smoothly. "I need you to pull the operating agreement for Vanguard Holding Partners LLC, and I need you to initiate a quiet, comprehensive title search on the Austin compound." "Done," Harrison stated, the sound of a keyboard clacking echoing through the line. "Give me 10 minutes." I walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse and looked out over the glittering skyline of Chicago. I felt an absolute terrifying calm descend over me. It is the specific physiological response that occurs right before I execute a hostile corporate takeover. The adrenaline vanishes, replaced by a cold, crystalline focus. David had made a fatal miscalculation. He had assumed that because I was quiet, because I did not demand daily praise for my financial support, I was entirely passive. He had confused generosity with compliance. He had forgotten what I do for a living. 10 minutes later, my secure email chimed. Harrison sent the encrypted file. I opened it, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon with practiced speed. The title search revealed a massive, glaring anomaly. 2 weeks ago, an inquiry had been formally filed with a boutique commercial lending firm in Dallas. It was a preliminary application for a cash-out refinance on the Austin compound. The application requested a withdrawal of $500,000 against the equity of the property. The signatures on the preliminary application belonged to David Vance and Chloe Vance. But there was a third name listed as the proposed incoming guarantor, intended to replace Vanguard Holding Partners LLC upon completion of the refinance. Beatrice Sterling. I stared at the name on the screen. The audacity was so profound it bordered on the psychotic. They were actively attempting to execute a hostile backdoor refinance of the property. They intended to strip $500 thousand in equity out of the house equity that existed solely because of my initial down payment and my ongoing mortgage coverage, and they intended to use that cash to fund their lavish Monaco charter and whatever other debts Beatrice had accumulated. They planned to remove my LLC from the title entirely and replace it with a woman who contributed absolutely nothing but condescension. They had attempted to initiate a corporate coup on my own property. The only reason the application had stalled in the preliminary phase was because the commercial lender required the physical, notarized signature of the managing member of the LLC to authorize the release of the title. My signature, a signature they obviously did not have, and could not forge without triggering immediate federal wire fraud alarms. I called Harrison back. "Did you see the refinance application?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "I saw it," Harrison replied, his tone low and dangerous. "It is legally dead in the water without your signature, Alexandra. But the intent is clear. They attempted to subvert the operating agreement and strip the asset. This constitutes a material breach of the good faith cooperation clause outlined in Section 4. "I am aware," I said. "What is the specific remedy outlined in Section 8? 3. Section 8.3, Harrison recited flawlessly, grants the managing member sole unilateral authority to execute the marketing, listing, or immediate liquidation of the physical property in the event of a material breach by the minority members." "Excellent," I stated. I walked back to my desk and opened a new corporate ledger. "Harrison, they fly to Monaco on the 12th of June. They will be airborne for 12 hours, and they will be out of the country for 3 weeks. They believe they have secured a reality that does not actually exist. Let them go, let them take the trip, and once they are in international waters?" Harrison asked, the unmistakable edge of a predator slipping into his voice. "Once they are in international waters," I replied, "we execute the liquidation protocol. I want that compound sold before their yacht docks back in Port Hercules." The 4 weeks leading up to their departure were a masterclass in tactical silence. I did not text David, I did not call Chloe. When Beatrice accidentally sent a photo of her new resort wear to a group chat I was still technically on, I did not react. I simply forwarded the image to a secondary monitor in my office and allowed it to fuel the cold, mechanical precision of the protocol I was constructing. In my line of work, you do not issue ultimatums. Ultimatums give the opposing party time to destroy evidence, hide assets, and construct a counter-narrative. You build the trap in absolute silence, and you let the target walk into it completely on their own volition. David and Chloe were entirely focused on the illusion they were projecting. Chloe's Instagram feed transitioned from vague hints about a European summer to blatant countdowns. She posted photos of new designer luggage, geotagging luxury boutiques in downtown Austin. David called me exactly once during this period, leaving a voicemail asking if I had any connections at a specific private banking firm in Geneva. I deleted the voicemail without listening to the end of it. They were so deeply intoxicated by the fantasy of their impending wealth that they entirely forgot the foundational reality of their existence. They owned absolutely nothing. Every square foot of glass in that Austin compound, every drop of water in the infinity pool, every blade of grass on the manicured lawn was legally controlled by a woman they had just actively attempted to defraud. I utilized those 4 weeks to quietly, methodically sever every single financial artery connecting them to my capital. The first action was the most critical. I contacted the corporate banking entity that managed Vanguard Holding Partners LLC. I formally revoked the automated payment draft that covered the $22 Sue's-end monthly mortgage on the Austin compound. I did not close the account, I simply starved it of liquidity. When the draft attempted to pull on the first of the month, it would hit a hard wall. The mortgage servicer would instantly flag the account for delinquency. Next, I accessed the corporate umbrella insurance policy. I had structured the policy to cover the physical estate, but out of a misplaced sense of sibling loyalty. I had also quietly added David and Chloe's leased luxury vehicles, a Range Rover and a Porsche Panamera, to the liability rider. I contacted the broker and executed a hard cancellation of the vehicle riders, effective immediately. The leasing companies would receive automated notifications of the insurance lapse within 30 days. If the vehicles were not reinsured, the leasing companies would initiate immediate repossession protocols. I did not touch the utilities. Turning off the water or electricity would immediately alert them to the lockdown before they left the country. The goal was not to cause an immediate inconvenience. The goal was absolute structural collapse. I wanted them to leave the country, believing they were royalty. I wanted them to return to the reality that they were squatters. On the 10th of June, 2 days before their flight, Harrison finalized the legal scaffolding. We drafted the formal notice of liquidation under Texas commercial real estate law and the specific parameters of the LLC agreement. I was required to send formal written notice to the minority members detailing the breach of contract and the ensuing liquidation of the asset. The law dictated a 30-day response window, but the clock did not start until the notice was officially received. I will send the certified notice on the morning of their flight, Harrison confirmed, reviewing the meticulously formatted documents. It will arrive at the compound while they are mid-air over the Atlantic. By the time they land in France, the 30-day clock will already be ticking. And the listing agent? I asked. I have engaged Marcus Sterling, Harrison replied, a hint of dark amusement in his voice. He handles exclusively ultra-high net worth liquidations in the Austin market. He specializes in quiet sales off-market, cash-only transactions for tech billionaires and foreign investors. He has already quietly circulated the floor plans to a highly vetted list of buyers. He anticipates a bidding war before the sign even hits the lawn. Ensure the sign is highly visible, Harrison, I instructed. I want it planted directly in the center of the manicured lawn, the moment they clear European airspace. June 12th arrived with the suffocating, oppressive heat typical of a Texas summer. I monitored their departure from the air-conditioned sanctuary of my Chicago penthouse. Chloe, unable to contain her desperate need for validation, posted a live video from the first-class lounge at Austin Bergstrom International Airport. She was holding a glass of champagne, David was grinning broadly in the background, and Beatrice was loudly complaining about the quality of the caviar to a flight attendant who clearly despised her. Wheels up for the Riviera. Chloe beamed into the camera, her massive, heavily leveraged diamond flashing in the ambient light. See you in a month, Texas. I watched the video twice. I did not feel a trace of anger. I felt the precise cold satisfaction of an engineer watching a highly complex mechanism function exactly as designed. I checked the flight tracker. At exactly 1:14 p.m. Central Time, their flight achieved cruising altitude over the eastern seaboard. They were entirely disconnected, suspended in a pressurized tube, 30,000 feet in the air, unreachable and blissfully ignorant. I picked up my secure phone and dialed Harrison. Execute, I said, within 30 minutes. The certified notice of liquidation was dispatched via priority courier. The courier delivered the heavy, terrifying legal packet to the massive front doors of the Austin compound, securing it directly to the glass. It detailed the exact nature of their breach, the fraudulent refinance application, and formally revoked their right to occupy the premises pending the immediate sale of the asset. 15 minutes after the courier departed, Marcus Sterling's luxury staging team arrived. I monitored the operation via the compound's integrated smart home security cameras, which I controlled directly from my laptop. The staging team moved with the lethal efficiency of a tactical unit. They did not touch David and Chloe's personal belongings, but they ruthlessly neutralized the lifestyle clutter. They removed the gaudy, overpriced modern art Beatrice had insisted on hanging in the foyer. They cleared the kitchen counters of the ridiculous, artisanal appliances that were entirely for show. And then, exactly as instructed, a massive, starkly elegant for sale X6 listing sign was driven deeply into the immaculate grass of the front lawn. The trap had sprung, the jaws had snapped shut, and the targets were currently sipping complimentary champagne somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, entirely oblivious to the fact that they were now technically homeless. The chaos began almost immediately, though not from the source I anticipated. I had underestimated the sheer predatory speed of the Austin luxury real estate market, and I had severely underestimated the social velocity of Chloe and Beatrice's friends. The first domino fell less than 4 hours after the sign was planted. Beatrice, in her desperate bid to maintain social dominance, had made enemies. Women in those high-echelon circles do not confront you directly. They wait for a vulnerability, and they attack it with a smile. A woman named Victoria, a formidable venture capitalist, who lived 3 estates down, was walking her Dobermans when she spotted the sign. Victoria despised Beatrice. She took a high-resolution photograph of the for sale sign, specifically ensuring that the address and the realtor's logo were clearly visible, and she immediately posted it to her private Instagram story. The caption was a masterpiece of lethal Southern politeness. "Oh my. So sad to see the Vance family liquidating so suddenly. Hoping everything is all right with David's startup." Moving on, the fallout within their specific social ecosystem was instantaneous and catastrophic. In Austin's elite circles, there's no greater sin than being exposed as a fraud. People will tolerate rudeness, they will tolerate scandal, but they will never tolerate a lack of capital masquerading as wealth. Victoria's post was rapidly screenshotted and disseminated across dozens of private group chats. Women who had eagerly attended Chloe's poolside luncheons began dissecting her every past behavior, retroactively identifying the tells that proved she never really belonged. David's business associates at the logistics firm, who followed Victoria on social media, immediately realized that his entire persona as a wealthy, successful entrepreneur was a complete fabrication. The social architecture they had spent 3 years desperately trying to construct collapsed into dust in a matter of hours. The for sale sign was not just an indicator of a real estate transaction, it was a glaring neon sign broadcasting their financial insolvency to the precise demographic they were most desperate to impress. By the time David, Chloe, and Beatrice landed in Nice, France, the photograph had circulated through the entirety of their social ecosystem. Their meticulously crafted illusion of effortless wealth had been publicly, violently detonated before they had even claimed their luggage. I was sitting in my penthouse, reviewing a new corporate acquisition file, when the digital barrage began. The first text arrived from David at 3:14 a.m. Chicago time. "Lex, what the hell is going on? Why is there a sale sign on the lawn? Call me right now." I did not reply. I let the silence stretch. In a hostile corporate takeover, you never respond to the initial wave of panic. You let the target exhaust their adrenaline, you let them internalize the reality of their situation, and you force them to negotiate from a position of absolute exhaustion. The second text arrived 10 minutes later, accompanied by a screenshot of Victoria's Instagram story. "Lex, you are humiliating us. Chloe is having a panic attack in the airport. Take the sign down immediately. This is my house." That text, specifically the phrase, "this is my house," provided me with a profound, terrifying clarity. He genuinely believed it, despite the LLC, despite the $700,000 down payment, despite the 3 years of subsidized existence. His arrogance had completely overwritten reality. He had convinced himself that my capital was his birthright. I opened the document file containing the forged refinance application. I attached the PDF to a new text message. I did not include a long, emotional paragraph. I did not demand an apology. I simply sent the document. I watched the read receipt illuminate on my screen. There was absolute silence from Nice for 20 full minutes. I could visualize the exact moment the realization hit them. I could picture David staring at the glowing screen of his phone, the blood draining from his meticulously tanned face, as he realized the fraudulent application he had attempted to hide was currently sitting in the inbox of a corporate liquidation executive. I could picture Chloe Fyakshark's panic attack abruptly halting as she realized the severity of the federal crime her husband and mother had attempted to commit. When David finally called, I answered on the third ring. I did not say hello, I simply listened to the ragged, panicked breathing on the other end of the line. Lex, David started, his voice a pathetic, trembling whisper. The arrogant edge was completely gone, replaced by the sheer, unadulterated terror of a man who suddenly realizes he is standing on a trapdoor. Lex, please, you don't understand. Beatrice found this broker. She said it was just a preliminary inquiry. We didn't actually sign the final documents, we were just exploring options. David, I said, my voice dropping into the cold clinical register I reserve for hostile executives attempting to justify embezzlement. You attempted to execute a fraudulent cash-out refinance on a property owned by a corporate entity you do not control. You attempted to strip $500,000 as in equity to fund a luxury yacht charter, and you attempted to subvert the operating agreement by replacing the primary financier with a woman who possesses less liquid capital than my administrative assistant. You committed a material breach of contract. Lex, I'm your brother. He begged, the panic escalating into a shrill whine. You can't just sell the house while we're in Europe. Where are we supposed to live? You're ruining everything. I am not ruining anything, David, I corrected him smoothly. I am simply executing the liquidation protocol outlined in Section 8.3 of the Vanguard Holding Partners Operating Agreement. An agreement you signed. The asset is non-performing, the minority members are in breach, and the physical property is currently being marketed to qualified cash buyers. I'll sue you, Beatrice's voice suddenly shrieked in the background. She must have grabbed the phone from David. You ungrateful, cold-hearted bitch. This is elder abuse. I will take you to court and take everything you own. I smiled. It was a cold, terrifying smile that did not reach my eyes. Beatrice, I said softly, ensuring my voice carried clearly over the international line. If you retain counsel and attempt to file a civil suit, I will immediately forward the forged refinance application to the FBI Cyber Division and the Texas Attorney General's office. You conspired to commit wire fraud and mortgage fraud. The federal sentencing guidelines for those offenses start at 5 years in a medium security facility. Are you entirely certain you wish to escalate this to a federal jurisdiction? There was a sharp intake of breath, followed by a muffled sob. Beatrice, the socialite, had suddenly realized she was entirely out of her depth. She was attempting to play parlor games with a woman who dismantles multinational corporations for sport. I strongly suggest, I concluded, that you enjoy your time in Monaco. It is likely the last luxury vacation you will experience for a very, very long time. I ended the call. I blocked David's number. I blocked Chloe's number. I blocked Beatrice's number. I did not need to hear anything else from them. The communication phase of the operation was officially concluded. The liquidation phase had begun. The Austin compound sold in exactly 11 days. Marcus Sterling, true to his reputation, orchestrated a ruthless, silent bidding war among 3 different tech executives relocating from Silicon Valley. The winning bid was entirely in cash, bypassing the tedious underwriting process and closing with terrifying speed. The final sale price was $2 million, significantly over the original valuation due to the aggressive market conditions. Because the certified notice of liquidation had been formally served, and the 30-day window was actively running, the title company possessed the legal authority to process the transaction. David and Chloe's physical presence was entirely unnecessary. The operating agreement granted me absolute signatory authority over the sale of the asset. I signed the closing documents from my office in Chicago. I did not use a fancy pen. I used a standard blue ballpoint, signed my name precisely on the designated line, and authorized the transfer of the deed. The financial reckoning was absolute. Upon closing, the LLC was formally dissolved. The outstanding mortgage balance was instantly cleared. I recouped my initial $700 down payment, plus my proportional 51% share of the massive equity gain. David and Chloe were technically entitled to their 49% share of the remaining equity, but in my profession, you never leave capital exposed. I instructed Harrison to place a formal legal hold on their portion of the funds, citing the fraudulent refinance application and the potential liability the LLC incurred due to their breach of contract. We required them to retain independent legal counsel and sign a comprehensive, ironclad non-disclosure and release of liability agreement before a single dime would be disbursed. We effectively tied their money up in a labyrinth of corporate litigation that would take months, if not years, to untangle. While they were stranded in Monaco, bleeding cash on a yacht they could no longer afford to tip the staff on, the reality of their situation rapidly deteriorated. The cancellation of the corporate umbrella insurance triggered a cascade failure. Without the liability rider, the leasing companies managing the Range Rover and the Porsche Panamera executed an immediate default protocol. A specialized repossession team arrived at the Austin compound the day after the sale closed. They quietly towed both luxury vehicles out of the driveway, completely unhindered by the new owners, who were entirely unaware of the drama unfolding. David, Chloe, and Beatrice returned from Monaco 21 days later. They did not return as triumphant socialites, they returned as exiles. I did not witness their arrival, personally. I was in London finalizing a merger, but Harrison provided a highly detailed, extremely satisfying report based on the accounts of the private security firm he had hired to oversee the final eviction of their personal property. They arrived at the Austin compound at 7 p.m. in a standard rideshare, presumably because their leased vehicles were no longer parked at the airport. They walked up the long, illuminated driveway, dragging their designer luggage behind them. When they reached the massive glass front doors, they discovered that the biometric locks had been entirely replaced. The smart home system they had spent hours curating no longer recognized their fingerprints. Through the glass, they could see the stark reality of their situation. The luxury furniture was gone, replaced by the minimalist, highly functional decor of a Silicon Valley tech executive who actually owned the property. Their personal belongings, clothes, jewelry, and whatever absurd artisanal appliances they owned, had been boxed up and transported to a secure, climate-controlled storage facility across town, accessible only after signing the required release forms. Chloe, according to the security report, collapsed onto her Louis Vuitton suitcases and began sobbing uncontrollably. Beatrice, stripped of her audience and her power, stood frozen in shock, staring at the new locks as if she couldn't comprehend the physics of a door she no longer controlled. David, the architect of his own destruction, simply sat down on the front steps, put his head in his hands, and remained entirely silent. The aftermath of a corporate liquidation is always messy, but the trajectory is inevitable. The weak assets are sold off, the toxic debt is isolated, and the core entity emerges leaner and infinitely more powerful. David and Chloe were forced to move into a cramped, entirely unremarkable, 3-bedroom apartment in a deeply unglamorous suburb of Austin. The social cachet they had spent 3 years desperately cultivating vanished overnight. Victoria, the venture capitalist neighbor, ensured that the full story of their sudden liquidation circulated through every country club and charity gala in the city. They became a cautionary tale, a stark reminder that borrowed wealth is an illusion that can be shattered by a single signature. Beatrice, unable to bear the sheer, suffocating humiliation of living in a suburban apartment with the son-in-law she now despised, quietly packed her bags and moved in with an old friend in Florida. She severed contact with Chloe almost entirely, blaming her daughter for failing to secure the financial resources they both felt entitled to. David attempted to contact me several times through intermediary legal channels. He demanded his portion of the LLC equity, claiming he needed the funds to start over and rebuild his life. Harrison, executing my specific instructions, buried him in a blizzard of procedural requirements, financial audits, and liability waivers. We dragged the process out for 7 grueling months. When the funds were finally released, A significant portion had been aggressively diverted to cover the legal fees and the outstanding penalties associated with the fraudulent refinance attempt. The money David received was barely enough to cover a year's rent on the suburban apartment. It certainly wasn't enough to fund another Monaco charter or another artisanal ice startup. I did not speak to my brother again. There was no tearful reconciliation. There was no dramatic confrontation in a lawyer's office where I demanded an apology. In my profession, you do not seek emotional closure from the executives you fire. You simply remove their security clearance, change the locks, and focus on the future of the firm. The psychological clarity that follows a decisive amputation is profound. For 3 years, I had allowed myself to be utilized as a silent, infinite resource. I had convinced myself that funding David's illusion was an act of sibling loyalty. I had believed that if I provided enough capital, he would eventually stabilize and become the brother I needed him to be. It was a naive, deeply flawed investment strategy. When you subsidize the existence of entitled individuals, you do not buy their loyalty. You simply fund their arrogance. You provide them with the resources they need to construct a reality where they believe they are self-made, while actively resenting the person who actually built the foundation. They will navigate around you, exclude you from the triumphs you funded, and eventually attempt to steal the very assets you provided them. The only effective response to this level of betrayal is an absolute, structural withdrawal. You do not argue with them, you do not explain your feelings, you do not demand they recognize your contribution. You simply review the operating agreement, locate the vulnerability they exposed, and you liquidate the asset. I am currently sitting in the first-class cabin of a flight to Tokyo, preparing to dismantle a failing manufacturing conglomerate. The view from 30,000 feet is exceptionally clear. I am not angry, I am not bitter, I am operating at the absolute peak of my professional capacity, unburdened by the parasitic demands of a family that viewed me solely as a balance sheet. I have built an empire defined by competence, precision, and a ruthless adherence to the truth. I will never apologize for protecting the capital I earned, and I will never again allow a toxic individual to believe they can subvert my authority. If there is a core lesson in my story, it is this: do not ever allow the people you support to mistake your generosity for weakness. Just because you are quiet, just because you prefer to remain in the background, does not mean you do not control the entire board. Sometimes the most terrifying, empowering action a woman can take is to simply stop paying the mortgage on an illusion she no longer wishes to sustain. You let the natural market forces of reality take over, you secure your own assets, and you walk away without looking back. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever had to execute a hostile takeover of your own life, or if you simply appreciate the cold, unforgiving mathematics of a flawless liquidation, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with a woman who needs a reminder of her own power. Let me know in the comments, what was the specific action that finally forced you to close the ledger on a toxic relationship? I read every single comment. Until next time, stay sharp, stay silent, and never leave your capital exposed. To fully comprehend the sheer, unadulterated arrogance required to attempt a hostile refinance on a property you do not own, you must understand the architecture of Vanguard Holding Partners LLC. When Harrison and I constructed the entity, we did not rely on standard, boilerplate templates. I am a woman who dismantles corporations that were supposedly built on airtight contracts. I know exactly where the structural weaknesses lie. The LLC agreement was 38 pages of dense, highly specific legal fortification. Section 4, the Good Faith and Fiduciary Duty Clause, was explicitly drafted to prevent the exact scenario David and Chloe attempted. It stated that any minority member who engaged in unauthorized financial inquiries, attempted to encumber the property with secondary debt, or materially misrepresented the ownership structure to outside financial institutions, would immediately forfeit their standing within the LLC. It was a self-detonating legal tripwire. David had a copy of this agreement, he had signed it, he had initialed the bottom of every single page, He simply believed that because I was his sister, the legal reality was somehow suspended. He believed that the familial bond acted as a universal override code for contractual law. He was violently incorrect. During the 3 years I subsidized their existence, the psychological dynamics within the Austen compound had shifted with a slow, toxic inevitability. The initial gratitude David displayed when the $700 down payment cleared evaporated within 6 months. It was replaced by a bizarre, aggressive entitlement. When you hand a deeply insecure man the keys to a kingdom he did not earn, he does not thank you. He begins to resent you for reminding him of his own inadequacy. Chloe's resentment was different. Chloe was a creature of pure surface tension. She had spent her entire adult life curating an aesthetic of effortless, inherited wealth. My existence, a woman who actually generated capital through grueling, relentless intellectual labor, was a direct threat to her narrative. If her country club friends understood that the $3.5 million compound was entirely underwritten by her sister-in-law's corporate restructuring bonuses, the illusion would shatter. Therefore, I had to be marginalized. Beatrice, however, was the true architect of the exclusion strategy. Beatrice recognized exactly what I was, and she recognized that I was the single greatest threat to her own parasitic existence. She had quickly established herself as the matriarch of the compound, occupying the sprawling guest house and treating the property as her personal fiefdom. She understood that if David and Chloe ever crossed a line that provoked me into withdrawing my financial support, she would be back in a cramped condo in Boca Raton within a week. Her solution was not to ensure David and Chloe treated me with respect. Her solution was to slowly, methodically sever my connection to the property, pushing me so far to the periphery that they could eventually claim complete ownership by sheer attrition. I recall a specific dinner party they hosted during my second year of funding the estate. I had flown down from Chicago after completing a brutal multi-billion-dollar liquidation of a commercial airline. I was exhausted operating on purely residual adrenaline. I arrived at the compound to find 70 people milling around the infinity pool. A string quartet was playing in the corner, servers were circulating with beluga caviar. I walked into the massive open-concept kitchen to pour myself a glass of water. Beatrice was standing by the marble island, holding court with a group of women who looked like they had been manufactured in the same plastic surgery clinic. "Oh, Alexandra is here," Beatrice announced, her voice pitched loud enough to carry. She just flew in from where was it? Liquidating airplanes or something equally grim. David and Chloe are so generous to let her use the guest suite when she needs a break from all that depressing corporate work. Let her use the guest suite. I stopped pouring the water. I looked at Beatrice. The other women chuckled politely, their eyes sweeping over my tailored, understated travel suit with thinly veiled pity. Beatrice smiled at me, a bright, triumphant smile that communicated exactly what she was trying to accomplish. She was establishing dominance in front of her peers. She was claiming the territory. I did not cause a scene. I did not correct her in front of her friends. I simply placed the glass on the marble counter, looked her directly in the eye and said, "It is always fascinating to see how comfortably people settle into environments they could never afford to build." I turned and walked to the guest suite. Beatrice's smile vanished, and the silence in the kitchen was absolute. That was the moment I realized the situation was terminal. They were not merely ungrateful, they were actively hostile. They viewed my presence as a glitch in their carefully programmed reality. From that night forward, I stopped viewing the Austen compound as a family home. I began viewing it exactly as I would view any non-performing corporate asset on my ledger. I began monitoring it for the optimal moment to execute a divestiture. When David's text message arrived, informing me that I was excluded from the Monaco charter, it was not a shock. It was the confirmation of a hypothesis I had formulated over 2 years ago. The sheer mechanics of planning a month-long yacht charter on the French Riviera require significant capital deployment. They were looking at a minimum expenditure of $130,000. David's logistics salary could barely cover the leasing payments on his luxury vehicles. Chloe generated zero revenue. Beatrice's finances were a closely guarded secret, but given her desperation to secure the cash-out refinance on the Austin compound, it was obvious she was functionally insolvent. The $500 and dollar fraudulent refinance application was not just a greedy overreach. It was an act of absolute financial desperation. They had likely booked the charter in January using high-interest credit lines or short-term bridge loans, banking entirely on their ability to strip the equity out of the house before the bills came due in June. They had literally bet the house on a vacation. It was a maneuver so recklessly stupid that it offended me on a purely professional level. In the restructuring industry, we see executives execute desperate, illegal maneuvers to cover margin calls or hide toxic debt. But to risk federal wire fraud charges to fund a yacht charter for your mother-in-law, it was a profound testament to the lethal combination of entitlement and financial illiteracy. During the 4 weeks leading up to their departure, while I was quietly severing the financial arteries that kept their illusion alive, I spent significant time coordinating with Harrison regarding the precise sequence of the liquidation. The Texas market is exceptionally volatile right now, Harrison advised during one of our late-night strategy sessions. Marcus Sterling has the off-market buyers lined up, but we need to ensure the closing happens before they return from Europe. If they are physically present on the property, when the new owners attempt to take possession, they could attempt to file an emergency injunction claiming illegal eviction. It would drag the process out in civil court. They will not be present, I assured him. Reviewing the flight manifests I had legally acquired through a contact at the airline. Their return flight lands in Austin on July 5th. We have exactly 21 days to complete the transaction, clear the title, and transfer possession. Marcus needs 10 days to close a cash transaction of this magnitude, Harrison noted, tapping his pen against the desk. The 30-day notice period mandated by the LLC agreement is the only variable. The notice period, I countered, requires them to respond and rectify the breach within 30 days. They cannot rectify the breach. The breach was the unauthorized execution of a fraudulent financial document. It is a permanent incurable violation of Section 4. We do not need to wait 30 days to list the property. We merely need to provide notice that the liquidation is occurring because of the incurable breach. Harrison paused, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. You are utilizing the acceleration clause, precisely, I said. The moment the courier secures that notice to the front door, the acceleration clause is triggered. The asset goes live on the market immediately. Marcus will secure the cash buyer within 48 hours, and we close on day 15. By the time they land in Austin, the property will have been legally owned by a third party for nearly a week. It was a flawless, legally impenetrable strategy. It left absolutely no margin for emotional manipulation or desperate countermaneuvers. The day the sign went into the ground, I felt a profound sense of equilibrium return to my life. I had excised a massive parasitic drain on my resources. I was no longer the silent benefactor to a trio of arrogant adults playing house with my capital. When David finally called from Nice in a state of absolute shrieking panic, attempting to justify the fraudulent refinance application as a preliminary inquiry, he fundamentally misunderstood the nature of his error. He believed he was in trouble for attempting to steal the money. He was not in trouble for attempting to steal the money. He was being liquidated because he believed I was stupid enough to let him. The final days of their Monaco charter must have been a psychological nightmare. I did not receive any further communications from them. The block I implemented was absolute, but the digital footprint of their unraveling was visible to anyone who knew where to look. Chloe's Instagram account, previously a relentless barrage of curated luxury, went entirely dark. The silence was deafening. Her friends in Austin, who had eagerly consumed Victoria's post about the for sale sign, were openly speculating in the comments of older photos. The social isolation was immediate and complete, according to financial records I later accessed during the final dissolution of the LLC. their credit lines began to snap like overstressed cables during the final week of their trip. The bridge loans they had undoubtedly secured to fund the yacht charter, operating on the assumption that the $500 zeros in refinance cash would arrive before the end of the month, suddenly became toxic liabilities. The lenders, realizing the collateral they were relying on did not actually exist, initiated aggressive collection protocols while David and Chloe were still physically in Europe. They were stranded in a playground for billionaires, suddenly unable to afford the basic operational costs of their own illusion. They were likely forced to max out every remaining credit card simply to cover their return flights. Meanwhile, the liquidation of the Austin compound proceeded with surgical precision. Marcus Sterling secured the cash buyer on day 4. The buyer was the founder of an AI logistics firm, relocating his headquarters from Palo Alto to Austin. He did not care about the coastal grandmother aesthetic Chloe had desperately tried to emulate. He wanted the smart home infrastructure, the acreage, and the immediate proximity to the tech corridor. We closed on day 15. The funds were wired directly into the secure holding account managed by Harrison. The deed was transferred, recorded, and finalized. The security firm I hired to oversee the final eviction of their personal property reported a grim, highly efficient scene. The new owner wanted the property entirely sanitized before taking possession. The staging team's minimalist decor was removed. David and Chloe's boxed belongings were unceremoniously loaded into climate-controlled moving trucks and deposited into a standard commercial storage unit on the outskirts of the city. The new owner immediately brought in a specialized contractor to replace the biometric security locks, physically severing the final link between my brother and the property he believed he owned. When their rideshare pulled up to the dark, locked compound on the evening of July 5th, the reality of their situation finally, irreversibly crushed them. The immediate aftermath was as predictable as it was pathetic. Deprived of the luxury compound and the leased vehicles, their manufactured social standing instantly evaporated. The people who had eagerly attended their infinity pool cocktail parties did not offer them guest rooms. The venture capitalists and plastic surgeons they had desperately tried to emulate completely ostracized them. In those circles, sudden financial ruin is treated like a highly contagious disease. David, forced into a cramped suburban apartment, attempted a final desperate maneuver. He hired a cheap litigation attorney, who sent Harrison a blustering, poorly drafted demand letter, threatening to sue me for wrongful eviction and breach of fiduciary duty. Harrison did not even dignify the letter with a formal response. He simply forwarded the attorney a copy of the Vanguard Holding Partners operating agreement, specifically highlighting Section 4 and Section 8. 3. He then included a pristine PDF copy of the fraudulent refinance application, complete with Beatrice's name as the incoming guarantor. Finally, Harrison attached a draft of the federal complaint we were prepared to file with the FBI Cyber Division regarding the attempted wire fraud, noting that if David pursued civil litigation, the federal complaint would be filed the following morning. David's attorney officially withdrew from the case less than 2 hours later. The complete structural collapse of their lives was not an act of vengeance. It was the natural mathematical consequence of their own arrogant calculus. They had attempted to leverage an asset they did not own, to fund a lifestyle they could not afford, while actively attempting to defraud the only person who was subsidizing their existence. They had built a massive, precarious tower on a foundation of lies, and I had simply removed the single pillar of capital that was holding it up. Gravity handled the rest. I received an email from Beatrice approximately 3 months after the liquidation. It bypassed my standard filters because she used a different address. It was a long, rambling, semi-coherent diatribe, accusing me of destroying her daughter's life out of sheer jealousy. She claimed that I was a cold, unfeeling machine who didn't understand the meaning of family. I deleted the email without finishing it. I do not require validation from the parasites I excise from my life. I understand the meaning of family perfectly. Family is a structure built on mutual respect, trust, and shared equity. It is not an unconditional line of credit granted to individuals who view your success as their personal ATM. I am currently sitting in the corner office of my Chicago firm. It is late evening, and the city lights are beginning to reflect against the massive glass windows. I am reviewing the final restructuring plan for a logistics company that nearly went bankrupt due to the catastrophic mismanagement of its founding board. We are isolating the toxic debt, firing the responsible executives, and preparing the core assets for a highly profitable resale. It is the exact same process I applied to my own family, executed on a slightly larger scale. The peace I feel now is absolute, the relentless draining anxiety of managing David's crises, of enduring Chloe's shallow posturing, of deflecting Beatrice's toxic manipulations, it is all gone. I reclaimed the massive amount of capital I was bleeding into their illusion, and more importantly, I reclaimed the emotional bandwidth I was expending, trying to save people who did not want to be saved. They only wanted to be funded. If there is a core lesson in my story, it is this: your competence is not a communal asset. Your wealth, whether generated through brutal corporate liquidations or years of disciplined saving, belongs entirely to you. Do not allow anyone, especially a family member, to convince you that your resources are their birthright. When you encounter individuals who operate with unearned entitlement, who mistake your generosity for an obligation, you must strip the emotion from the equation. You observe their actions, you document their overreach, and you review the contract. You do not argue with them, you do not explain your feelings, you do not demand an apology from people who are fundamentally incapable of remorse. You simply execute the liquidation protocol, you change the locks, you secure your capital, and you walk away. Let them live in the reality they actually built, not the illusion you were funding. Thank you for listening to my story. If you have ever had to dismantle a toxic dynamic and reclaim your own empire, or if you simply appreciate the cold, unforgiving mathematics of a flawless execution, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with a woman who needs a reminder of her own power. Let me know in the comments, what was the specific moment you realized the person you trusted was actively attempting to defraud you? I read every single comment. Until next time, stay sharp, stay silent, and always control the equity.